All right, let's get right into this. The Quran doesn't really move in a straight line, like a simple timeline. It's more like a spiritual highway with different lanes. And the wild part is, which lane you end up on has nothing to do with where you are or what year it is. It's all about your inner state, your choice.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll talk about a fish and a fork in the road. Then, we'll look at this dead-end path, the hardened lane of Taghūt. After that, we'll uncover the escape route, the bypass of return. We'll pinpoint that exact moment you can switch lanes, and finally, we'll see the incredible result, what I'm calling a multiplication of light.
But before we go any further, just think about this question for a second. When you're in a moment of intense constraint, a prison cell, let's say, is that the end of your story, like a tomb, or could it actually be the beginning of something new, like a womb? Well, according to the Quran's framework, the answer, it really depends entirely on you.
Okay, so let's jump into our first section, a fish and a fork. We need to get a handle on what constraint even means in the first place.
The story of the prophet Yūnus is the perfect place to start. So he gets swallowed by a huge fish. But what's so amazing here is that the Quran never says the fish is evil. It's not the villain of the story. The fish is just a constraint. It's a neutral physical situation, a boundary. That's it.
So if the fish is neutral, what decides what happens next? Well, that's where the nafs comes in. This is such a critical idea. It's your inner self, your soul, that core part of you that chooses how to respond. The nafs is basically the driver that steers you into one lane or the other when you hit a roadblock.
And that really ties it all together. A constraint is just a neutral boundary, but depending on how your nafs reacts, that exact same boundary can feel like a prison, a tomb, or it can become a womb, a place for a total spiritual rebirth. The whole game is internal.
Okay, so now let's look at the first possible path you could take. This is what we're calling the hardened lane of Taghūt, and it's all about blaming everything and everyone else.
Now, this is where things get really fascinating, because this redefines what Taghūt even is. It's not some monster, it's not a specific tyrant, it's a spiritual path, a lane that you enter the second your nafs becomes unjust, the second it starts externalizing all the blame. This is the "it's not my fault" highway.
And who's the poster child for driving in this lane? Pharaoh. He didn't just blame other people. He took it to the absolute extreme and declared himself the ultimate authority, the source of all truth. This is the absolute peak of that Taghūt mindset.
And if you stay in this lane, the outcome is, well, it's inevitable. He finally gets it, but only at the very last second, as the sea is literally closing in on him. And by then, it's just too late. Realizing the truth only after everything has collapsed, that is the punishment. His body isn't preserved for glory, it becomes a permanent warning sign for anyone else thinking of taking that road.
So you can see this clear four-stage pattern emerge. It all starts with arrogance, where the self says, "I'm in charge." That naturally leads to oppression, because you start pushing all the blame outwards. Then comes late sight, where you only see the truth when it's all over, and it ends in fossilization. You become a lesson for history, a warning sign.
But here's the beautiful thing. The Quran always gives you another option. So let's move on and explore this other route, the bypass of return, the path of aligning yourself from the inside.
And our first example is Asiya, Pharaoh's own wife. Her story is incredible because it proves a powerful point. You can be physically stuck in the most corrupt system imaginable, but spiritually, you can take a completely different exit. Her body was in Pharaoh's palace, but her nafs, it took the bypass. And then there's Yūsuf. Think about it. Thrown in a well, sold into slavery, tossed in prison, he faced one constraint after another. But he never, ever entered that lane of revenge or bitterness. Instead, his authority comes back to him through truth, patience, and clarity. It's the total opposite of Pharaoh's playbook. And one more, Queen Bilqīs. Her advisors are all telling her, "Let's go to war," the standard playbook, but she completely bypasses that lane. She chooses wisdom, investigation, and diplomacy instead of just raw force. She proves that war isn't destiny, it's just a lane you choose, often when the nafs feels insecure.
Okay, so we've got these two very different paths, but how do you actually get off the destructive one and onto the bypass? Let's zoom in on that internal turning point.
So we're back with Yūnus, in the belly of the fish. And this is what he says. In his darkest moment, under the most intense pressure imaginable, he doesn't blame the fish, the storm, or God. He points the finger directly inward. "Indeed, I have been of the wrongdoers." And that, right there, that's the key.
that single internal flip of the switch. The moment the nafs stops pointing fingers and instead takes ownership of its own state, the prison walls of that Taghūt lane, they just dissolve. The whole path collapses and a new one opens up.
And this brings us to our final and maybe most amazing part, the multiplication of light. Because taking the bypass doesn't just get you back to where you started. Oh no, the outcome is so much bigger than that.
What we see again and again in these stories is a consistent spiritual law. When you navigate a tough situation with truth and that inner alignment, the result isn't just survival. It's not about breaking even. It's about an increase, an excess of light, a multiplication of good.
Just look at Yūsuf again. His journey begins with a dream, a tiny spark of light for one kid in a well. But it doesn't just end with his freedom. It ends with his entire family reunited, a society healed, and that vision coming true on a huge collective scale. One soul becomes a new order. That is multiplication.
And we see the exact same principle with Ayyūb. After all his trials, he isn't just restored to how he was before. No, he's given back what he lost and the like of them with them. It's a clear pattern. Loss that's endured with truth comes back with a surplus.
So let's just recap the whole structure we've walked through. First, some kind of neutral constraint shows up in our life. Second, our inner self, our nafs, makes a crucial choice. Do I blame out or look in? Third, that choice activates a lane. And finally, that lane leads to a very clear outcome. Either you become a fossilized warning for others or you experience the dynamic multiplication of light. And really, that brings us right back to the beginning. Constraints, challenges, pressure, they are going to happen. That's just part of life. We can't avoid them. So the only question this whole framework leaves us with, the one that really matters, is this: which lane are you going to activate?